like to call to order the September 13 meeting of the Isle of Palms Planning Commission and acknowledge that the public and press have been duly notified in accordance with state law. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from our last meeting back in July. Do you have any comments or motions?
Move to accept as.
Yes, move to accept.
We'll have got a movement and a second. Any comments on the minutes? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Okay, minutes pass. I understand we do have somebody who would like to speak in public comments, which would come at this point during our agenda. The rules basically are 3 minutes and you will be timed, but you're welcome to take the podium, speak clearly into the microphone, and
Thank you.
and appreciate your time coming out here.
My name is Al Klaus, 3 Grand Pavilion. This is meeting number 22 since 4/13 of 22 regarding noise ordinance and nuisance. We understand your mission. Respectfully, we hope you understand ours. Our residential neighborhood does not deserve to have decibels dictate our livability. If we tell you we are disturbed, then we are disturbed. If we need to execute affidavits, we will. I will not drag you through our history. However, in previous meetings with the Public Safety Committee, any protection provided to us under the current ordinance by a 2-to-1 vote was slaughtered with a machete from the criteria. Totally pro-resort. We encourage you to differentiate between noise from a hotel as compared to noise from a hotel which is located in a residential neighborhood. Noise duration, 24/7, 365. We encourage you to not allow the hotel a double standard when compared to a residential neighborhood. Our livability since April 21 is not what you would prescribe to your mom and dad. Hotel distance from the complainants. Mrs. Williamson, that wall is the property line of the Sweetgrass Inn. This podium is her property line, 25 feet. Klaus's, that corner to the corner out in the hallway, 62 feet. Very, very close proximity. Please let us remind you, over 14 months ago, we requested a noise abatement study, following up with a second request in November 22. The resort egregiously decided to make a recipe for more noise, a sound study, which you'll be discussing today. We encourage all of you to tour the Sweetgrass Inn. You will notice the design projects directly south into a residential neighborhood. An elevated dam is also in place to protect their empire, forcing a potential surge into a residential neighborhood. Aesthetically complemented by a we ran out of money finish on the south side of the property. I've called IOP police over 65 times, which resulted in 5 tickets, all from the concert from hell on November 4, 2022. That's a little over 7%. Does someone see something amiss about this? In the 9/12/23 City Council packet, the livability statistics, August of 23, noise, 17 complaints, 0 citations. We know your mission is not enforcement. We love cities. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just so happens, the first item
Thank you.
of business today is the discussion of the noise ordinance. And
Yeah,
Don't
I'll just
know where
give
you
a
want to start,
quick kind of introduction, I guess, to what the request has been and why this is coming to you all. Have been discussing and talking about the sound in the city and the noise ordinance now for probably a year, maybe more. At their last meeting, they asked for your input on the issue of the sound issues. And in your packet are the existing code and the most recent proposed code. And wanted to get your kind of input, feedback, and David happens to have a background in this, and he will be able to provide some insight with the technical aspects. And we also have the police chief to talk about kind of his history with the noise ordinance, how things are handled and enforced. So at the end of this process, we're hopeful that the planning commission will have some recommendation on what to do if there's an ordinance amendment necessary or recommended, that you all would pass that forward to city council. It's a little bit outside of your wheelhouse. The state code says that you will advise on land use matters, you advise on zoning matters, subdivision matters. There's nothing in the state code that says you can't advise kind of on any matter that the city requests of you. So that's what's happened here now. I will tell you that I have never, most issues that you will deal with, I'm aware of how they're administered. I'm aware of some history in terms of, how the ordinance came to be. When it comes to the noise ordinance, I'm a little bit, it's a little bit out of my wheelhouse. So part of the reason that we have the chief here is it's squarely in his wheelhouse. I mean, he deals with nuisance type complaints. They deal with the court system, what kind of burden of proof or, what they deal with when going to court, where I obviously don't, Matt doesn't. We deal with a whole different process to deal with compliance and variances from laws and things like that. So it's a little bit outside of what we've traditionally done. Council asked at their meeting if you all would be willing to look at it. I told them, that you're a very capable, kind of technically minded group, and I'm sure, you could provide some valuable feedback. And I think especially with David's kind of expertise specifically in the field of decibels and engineering in the field. So I promised the chief that we would put him first, and I've asked him to basically be prepared to answer questions and provide information on the history of how they have handled noise complaints in the past, what their kind of barometer is for handling enforcement, and their challenges with the current code versus the proposed code. So if you're okay, I'd ask that the chief,
Please.
and that mic is probably on, right here, chief, is probably fine.
Right here.
Yeah.
Finally get to sit at the big kids' table. So if you'll kind of indulge me here, I want to take a minute because I do realize not a lot of people work in my environment and understand what we have to go to court and present and all these things. I'm going to give a bunch of information. None of it is intended to insult anybody's intelligence or anything like that, but just want to give you a very big look at kind of what we see. I've got several categories I'll kind of touch on, and then I'll open up for questions if that's acceptable to you. Does that sound good?
Great.
Perfect. So first I wanted to start with court. That's one of our biggest issues here, is being able to present in court. And the reason that is because when we present in court, we have to have a burden of proof that meets beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not like if you're involved in a lawsuit, you can do a preponderance of evidence, which is a much lower threshold. We have to have a beyond reasonable doubt, which definition for that is that we have to be able to convince a jury that there is no other reasonable explanation based on the evidence that's presented for trial. So it's not a simple, I say it and it's golden. When I first got in law enforcement, police officers' word mattered. It was a big deal. I could stand up there and say everything. That's not the case anymore. Just me saying it is not enough to get beyond a reasonable doubt. So when we talk about evidence, because that's what we have to be able to present as some form of evidence, that is defined as an item or information making a fact more probable or less probable, because we can present evidence on the defense or on prosecution. And one of the reasons that I bring all that up is we currently have a case that is being heard in the municipal court, and the argument being made by the defense is that we have a subjective ordinance and that we have not presented any evidence of a noise violation. And that is something that's not been ruled on yet, but it is exactly what my concern has been the whole time, that we can't really present anything other than the officer arriving and saying, I thought it was too loud. You know, but what I think is too loud is completely different than what Douglas might think is too loud. You know, I have 4 kids at home. I may be more open to noise than somebody who does not have 4 children at home. I live down from a clubhouse that has wedding venues. I'm okay with that. Not everybody is. So that's where we have the issue with the court. And when we talk about numbers, just to give you a perspective of where we're at and what we see, for this year, 2023, from January to September 10th, we've had a total of 120 complaints for noise. 46 of those have been founded at short-term rentals. 29 of those have been founded at a resident or at a business. 45 have been unfounded, meaning the officer shows up and there's no violation. That may be that the officer shows up and there is no noise taking place, or that the officer shows up and it's merely children playing in a swimming pool at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Clearly not a violation. And I say that because recently I responded to a call on the weekend of Labor Day weekend on a Saturday for a loud noise complaint at a local business. And I responded and I parked outside and I listened. And all I heard was children having fun. And that was not a violation. They weren't screaming. It wasn't even as loud as my children would be in my house. So that was an unfounded complaint. When we look at the month, which Mr. Klaus pointed out, we had 17 total noise complaints. 11 of those were unfounded, meaning that the officer showed up and there was not a violation. The response that the police department has would be that a couple things. Like I said, I respond to some of these to hear them. One thing we've been doing is we have been using a decibel reader to go around random places on the island at random times and take readings just to see what are the average noises, because we know that question comes up quite a bit. When I looked at it for the month of August, we took 27 readings. The average decibel reading was 64.4 decibels. When we break those down a little bit more, a street sweeper was 83.1 decibels. Lot B, the municipal parking lot, the large one, at 9:30 in the morning with no cars running and just animals, was 56 decibels. The water pump put out on Palm Boulevard during Hurricane Idalia was 85.3 decibels. Concert goers, not the concert, just the goers before the concert started at the Windjammer, 79.5 decibels. The outside concert at Windjammer, 83.7 decibels. So we've been taking these readings all over, and just to kind of get an idea of what are we looking at, you know, so that you would have that information. We could kind of give some of that to you and help guide if that was the direction that you went. When we talk about enforcement, because that is a common conversation of enforcement or a lack thereof or a perceived lack of. And so when I do that, the definition according to Oxford's language is enforcement is the act of compelling observance of or compliance with a law, rule, or obligation. It's important because it tells you that it's the act of compelling somebody to comply with a law. That's what it is. We accomplish that through a couple different methods. First is an officer presence. We teach this at the academy. When a police officer shows up, their mere presence in a police car and a uniform is meant to deter crime. And if we show up to a call and crime stops, then we have caused compliance with the law. It may also be a verbal warning where we show up and we say, hey, you cannot do this. You know, and we just send them on their way. Don't do it again. A lot of times I put this with like a speeding vehicle. If I stop a speeding vehicle, well, these would be written tickets by state statute. We have to do a written warning for a traffic stop. But if I stop somebody and they are open and honest with me and I clearly see that they understand they have violated the law and that they know they've done something wrong, I'll probably write them a warning. a written warning. Doesn't have to be a ticket, but I'm still gaining compliance with the law. Even if I'm sitting there with my blue lights on behind that car, what have I done to every other car coming by? They're complying with the law.
Get out of the way.
Yes, we hope they do that part. And then the next one would be, we write a ticket. And the tickets can be $133 all the way up to over $1,000, depending on court fines. So when you look at those, that's a misconception. Everybody's like, hey, it can only be $500. And that is what our ordinance says. But then there are court fines and assessments that are added to it, which make it much higher than that. And the lovely clerk of court probably understands that math a lot better than I do. But there is a math process to it that dictates what that highest amount can be. And then the last one would be an arrest. I hope we don't often arrest people for noise violations, although our ordinance does give that ability. But those are our methods of enforcement. And I tell you all those, and then I want to break them down into kind of scenarios on how we look at things. There is a perspective from the police officer. When we go to a house, especially a short-term rental house, I go to a house one day, I'm dealing with one person. When I go the next time, maybe 2 or 3 days later, it's a whole new group of people, right? And so if I go and it's a family that's playing in the pool, and I come up and I say, hey, you can't do this, probably just going to give them a warning, right? Now, say I come back 2 days later or later that day, and they are doing the same thing, I'm probably not going to write you a warning because I done told you once, right? If I show up and I'm telling you, hey, you've got to turn it down and quiet this music down, and you just look at me and say you don't care, well, you're probably going to catch a ticket, and then we're going to start calling property managers and all this other stuff. And we're going to make your night really horrible for you, and you'll probably be in your car loaded and moving down the street. But we write a ticket for that. If I go to the same house for a second call, you're probably going to get a ticket. If there is a gross violation, which is a large party, we don't get a lot of these. There's a lot of conversation that makes it sound like we have a lot of these, and I can really count on one hand how many we've had since I've been here for 4 years. Large parties, people get tickets, people typically get arrested because there's a lot more going on than just a loud noise. So we don't have a lot of those, but if we have something that is a gross violation like that, we're going to write them a ticket. And then the biggest issue for us with the ordinance as it's written now is the subjectiveness. It is hard to defend a subjective definition in court. People watch CSI, that's probably old now, they watch other things now, they ID Discovery, and they see all this evidence and fingerprints and DNA and stuff that gets presented, and believe it or not, if we sat a jury, that is the expectation, is that we are presenting hard proof of a violation. And with a thought of my own opinion, it is not hard proof. It is hard to defend that in court. So that's what I had, and I'll be happy to take any questions from y'all at this point. Oh, wait a minute, did I go over the annuals? I did, okay.
So so the current ordinance is, you don't like the lack of concrete proof, it's subjective, right?
Correct, yes, ma'am.
Okay, what are your thoughts on the proposed ordinance? And with the proposed ordinance, or any ordinance, I'm kind of double layering this, so I apologize. I think we went over this too last time. Do you get calls from Wild Dunes, or does Wild Dunes call security? And does security forward those calls to you? So I see it's a two.
So two questions. I'll
sorry.
answer.
Gotta get them all in.
I'll go
Before
in the order that you asked them. The first one is, what I do like about it is a decibel level is easy to, I've got my body camera standing here, and I can see that it violates a certain number. And that is evidence that I can present forward. That I do like. I like having evidence that I can present in a court, and I think that is the thing that we are lacking now, is something to present other than my own opinion. And then when we get into the video, because I know that'll be a conversation, if your body camera's going to pick up the decibel reading, it's going to pick up the noise too. It is. But that's also going to be inflated by whatever device I turn it on. It's not going to read at the same level as what I was hearing. So it's still not an exact science. And if I'm a defense attorney, I'm going to bring that up every time. And as far as your question pertaining to Wild Dunes, some of them will call us. Some of them will call Larry and his team for security. And Larry will typically try to handle that without bothering us because he says he doesn't want to bother us. And believe it or not, that's what most of our residents say. And my response to that is, you're not bothering us. We are here 24/7. it's not a bother. This is what we do. So it's kind of hard to gauge the numbers in there because Larry will take care of those and we won't know what they are or what they're not. I will say for Mr. Klaus, he calls us. And I know he and some of that group right there, they will call us directly. They won't call Wild Dunes Security. And that gives us the ability to get those measurements on the number of calls that are coming in.
Okay, because, I mean, I would look at the data as a little skewed without you being the sole central person receiving calls. So when you say you had 120 calls in a 9-month period, you would have to factor in Wild Dunes, and that would probably be more. But I'm just.
Could be,
with the
I don't
data-
know.
For the data you're giving us, that's what I'm trying to.
I'm giving the data that people give us. And our message over the 4 years that I've been here to everybody has been call the police department. We've been telling everybody. And if they're still not doing that, I can't force them to.
No.
But yes, it does skew the numbers to an extent. And we would continue to tell people, call us. You know, it's not a bother. If nothing else, you're getting a police officer riding through Wild Dunes. So call us. That presence can deter other crime too.
Absolutely.
I got a question. I almost called you this week, but I figured it'd be better just to bring it up in public, of the group. So I kind of equate in the noise measurements kind of like doing radar for speed checks, and kind of there's a similarity there. So inherently, if we put a number, 50, that's not necessarily a hard line from your perspective because, again, there's challenges to how accurate is the noise measurement, how, those issues come into when you end up in court. So I was kind of just your take on, like I said, if I look at Palm Boulevard and the speed limit's 30, and y'all started giving tickets for everybody doing 31, there'd be an uproar probably on the island. So there's some kind of, is that true? Just to assume that there would be some kind of grace in any number we picked.
Could there be? Certainly. I mean, I can't speak for officers and say that they're going to 100%. If it hits it, they're going to write a ticket. We could set a zero tolerance for that. The difference in that device and a radar is that a radar is only accurate within the first 3 miles. So it could be 3 plus or 3 minus, whatever the speed actually is. So we have to give a little with that.
Well, that's why I use that comparison. In a noise meter, they've got a tolerance in there of, so that again, you could
Right.
come up
Same
in
type of
court
thing.
and find a exact reading. So I was just, if it, make sure you would kind of agree with that comparison.
I certainly
To
see
some
there
extent.
could be that type of comparison there. And there would be some stuff that we might have to learn as we're going through. One of the benefits we have of a radar is that every year, I've got a technician that comes out and he certifies that radar. And when I walk into court, I got this certification and I've got this log where we've checked it every day and we've tested it. And that would be something we would have to look for a measurement device as well, or making sure that it's operating appropriately.
That was gonna be my question too, is are you using the same device when you tested it, and is it calibrated to some standard? I mean, I don't know anything about these things, so I'd be curious, but it sounds like you realize that we'd have to dial it in a little bit. But also, do you have a standard for how far, like proximity-wise, you are from the source of the noise? Because these are finer details, I would imagine, that are gonna have to be ironed out as well.
Yes, sir. And so those were laid out in the draft noise ordinance, and they are measured from where the property line is closest to the complainant. The benefit of that is it's good for both sides because I'm now measuring what this individual should be hearing at their house. It's different if I walk right up and I'm measuring right next to the people who are talking and they're hitting at 60 or 70 decibels, when in reality, if I was on the property line, they might be at 30 or 40. So there is a definition laid out in that draft ordinance that gives the property line, and if they won't let us on their property, which I don't see that happening, most people who call us, they want us to hear it from their perspective. But if they don't, we would go to the nearest roadway close to it and get a measurement from there. That's somewhere that we have public access to.
So when you were doing your testing or experimenting, were you just kind of picking spots where you thought there would be a common complaint?
Correct. We
generated?
picked just a couple things. We were looking at some where we got complaints and we would just take some readings. And then some of them, it was just to get a bearing on what is the sound measuring at in these different areas? What kind of sounds are what? Because that is a big conversation that we had as we continued to talk about the draft. Is 60 is a normal conversation according to one reading, and then another reading might say 65. And so it was really us trying to come up with what do we see in our community as being these common sounds that we're hearing in these common decibel readings.
Chief,
Yes, sir.
have you read what David Cohen has written?
Briefly, I've skimmed it. I have not read the whole thing.
He does
It's very
bring up.
technical.
He does, yes.
I was,
yeah, he-
yeah, just trying not to get too technical.
Yeah,
It's in
this
your
was
nature,
him
David.
not being technical, so watch out if he gets
Buckle in when he
technical.
gets technical.
We'll all leave the room.
Yeah, exactly.
He does bring in, sound levels shall be taken with a sound level meter certified as meeting the type 2 requirements of the ANSA, da.
The antiquated one.
Yeah. No,
Oh, is
this
this
is
the new one?
him saying what should be used. now,
Okay.
The new and improved.
It was just a newer version of what they were kind of referring to.
Yeah.
Which would make sense, because we did have an older version in there, and we would want to move to something that these days is more reliable and probably more accurate than the older devices.
Okay. That's it.
So if I could kind of summarize, and I tend to oversimplify things by my nature, but I think you all are picking up on, at the highest level, I guess this discussion about should there be an actual decibel in the code. Currently, there's not. The proposed amendment, there is. So that's a question. And I guess prior to that question, there's the question, I think David's kind of brings it up, about, is there a problem that warrants changing? I guess that's question one. Identifying whether in your minds there is a question or an issue for the community that warrants changing the code. Question two, should there be a decibel? If so, should there be a decibel reading in the code? I think that, you're hearing kind of two different viewpoints on that, as whether there should be or there shouldn't be. And I think David can probably give some clarity, because I think a lot of his comments really focused on those readings versus the human ear and how those two interplay. And then I think third, if it's yes and yes, the third is what is an appropriate decibel reading? Is 70 a number, 75 a good number? From my perspective, that's where folks in the process really kind of got hung up. I see this thing, I don't know, and you hear what 75 sounds like, what 70 sounds like. From my perspective, it's very hard for me to visualize, is that too much? Is that too loud? Should it be some other number? So to kind of boil down at a high level what I think are the pinch points in this thing, those are the three that I see and identify. And it's a tough judgment as to where to go. So I think it got bounced around a lot, and I think David's comments were seen as, hey, we have a resident expert in the city committee group, and let's rely on that expertise to kind of drill down on these questions. Also, from my perspective, when you read through the noise ordinance, there's a list of kind of 15 things about mufflers, dogs, pets, pile drivers. Steam shovels. From my perspective, all of those other things are dealt with. I mean, we do have noise complaints from construction, but I think they're dealt with reasonably. So I almost think we could laser focus on music. I mean, I think the primary kind of complaints have been amplified music. I mean, we've talked about like crowd noise. I don't know that there's any, if kids are playing and they're raucous, unless they are really excessive, I don't know that there's going to be a way that the police can regulate that. I mean, it just seems untenable. So I think from my perspective, to simplify, because it gets very complex, it gets very, can get emotional. But from my standpoint, those would be kind of the triggers that you all would look to identify. First, is there a problem? Secondly, do you have a specific decibel or do you not? Thirdly, if yes and yes, what is that decibel rating? So I think from my perspective, after hearing it for a while, That's kind of how I would ask this group to channel your focus.
All right. I've been involved with this before in a different town. And fortunately or unfortunately, there were three of us who were physicians and doing research, so we did a lot of work on this. First of all, noise comes from the Latin word nausea. So let's get that off the board right away. Number one is you have to define what noise is. There's 4 million definitions of noise, but it's basically an unwanted, excessive, or disturbing sound that affects people, animals, whatever you want to call it. So we have to define what we want to call, how we want to define noise. Second thing is you have to define a level. It has to be objective. It can't be, well, it should be around this or that. And every chart you look at for noise gives different numbers. The one thing that's consistent, if you're at a rock concert, it's around 130 decibels, and I can tell you that for a fact. Normal outdoor levels, less than 55. Disturbing, 70. It seems to be the consensus number. So we have to establish an exact number, and that has to be in our code, what is excessive. Third thing you have to define is the hours. You have to have quiet hours. So is it 7 a.m. or 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., 9 p.m. to 6 a.m.? We have to define that somehow. There's nothing in the literature anywhere that stipulates what the quiet hours should be, but we have to establish that. If we don't, it makes it more difficult for the police department. Number 4 is compliance. We have livability officers. Anyone can buy a decibel meter reader from Amazon for $20, so everyone knows where the compliance is. If you pick 70 during the quiet hours, anyone can measure that. So we have to get compliance based on setting out rules. And the 5th one is the fines. So, or however you're already handling it, that's perfectly fine. What we established up in the last town I lived in, Michigan, was the first fine was $325, then went up to $1,000. And then after that, it was a mess.
So were you involved with crafting a noise ordinance in
Yes.
Michigan? And was it a similar set of
Exactly. It was
Was
a
it-
small town with a hotel in the town.
with no decibel level
There
in
was-
the code?
There was
and then-
nothing. The code
then-
was totally subjective.
And then the town adopted a decibel reading?
There was a commission, just like this
Yep.
one, who established the 5 aspects of the new law, basically.
And established a decibel level.
Yeah, we use 70. The
That's-
problem, as you said, what we did, though, is measure it from the person who complained. So wherever they were standing or sitting, that's where we measured the decibels.
From your perspective, was it successful there? Was
Yeah.
the change in the code, did
Well,
it
the hotel
fix the
stopped.
problem?
Yeah, the hotel stopped blasting their speakers after 10 p.m. There weren't that many parties. It was a residential community with a hotel and a lot of restaurants, and we had outdoor restaurants next door to or across the street from people's homes. So it got the focus of the restaurateurs. They toned it down. They didn't seat people after 8 p.m. because they knew they wouldn't be finished until after 10. And all these things worked because it was all etched in stone. It was five things in the code, and everyone knew what they were, and everyone knew what the results were if it wasn't complied with. And it was fine. I mean, we were still an occasional party in the park that they shouldn't have had, but it worked.
That's interesting, the exact same,
But
exact
here,
same
I mean, we've got several hotels on our island. Most of them are in a commercial business district, so there aren't as many complaints. And I wonder how many complaints have really been levied against, not to name names, but the Windjammer, who has live amplified music in their back. I think about the house that's next door. I don't know if those folks complain or
They all bought.
or they say go watch free music.
We have not had a complaint.
And so,
They're all
but
at
the
the concert.
problem for Mr. Kraus in this instance is his neighborhood decided to build a hotel right on top of his home. That could be, if it wasn't in Wild Dunes, something that we could do with the zoning ordinance, prohibiting or requiring buffer zones and things like that, but we have no control over what Wild Dunes does.
Well, you do have control if you set quiet hours,
Well, with the
There's no
noise
one- there's
ordinance,
no
yes, but
one-
I'm thinking about a zoning ordinance.
Yeah,
I
there-
think the better way to deal with Grand Pavilion would have been zoning, but.
There is something that absorbs sound, like
Right.
brass.
Well, another thing you could consider is
Space,
taking
mass.
amplified music inside. Because I know with the events over there, for every wedding they have outside and reception, they always have an indoor facility in case it rains. You could say your reception is now inside with amplified music inside, which would take a lot of the pressure off of them playing outside.
Which is how they dealt with it at the Dewberry downtown Charleston.
If you want music outside, it's on an acoustic level,
Yeah.
nothing amplified. And-
Well, and the new restaurant in the harbor, we were the beneficiaries of their music because it bounces right off the water and hits Waterway
Right.
Island Drive right in the back. It doesn't matter where you're at. And their music has been toned down. I don't know what you all did to tone them down, but the speakers aren't facing the houses on the marina side anymore. At least not after 9 PM, they don't hear it. So I think what we've done is, it worked, and I think it gives you all the standards that you need. If it's written, it's the law.
So, let's kind of go on. Since I kind of instigated this, and I started following this from the beginning because I thought it would eventually come to planning, because typically noise ordinances are written around zones. So it is whether most of the ones I've seen, it's, you identify SR1 as having these levels, the GC having different levels, and so on. So that's why I kind of thought it would come through planning, and I was following it. But anyway, I'll just start where, in the proposed ordinance, and what just probably really hit me on that, and I guess now I'll back up a little bit, is the noise measurements. I kept hearing people talk about numbers and throwing numbers around. Well, you can do different methods of measuring and come up with different numbers. So that was never really clearly defined, is how you were measuring it. The ANSI spec that we calls out tells what the noise meter how it or different ways for it to measure, but it doesn't actually tell you what settings to use when you're actually making a measurement. And so you can have different values, and if you look at charts and you see discrepancies, also the distance plays a huge factor into what the noise level is. So when you look at something like what Sandy passed out, and they just show you these are at these levels, they're not telling you how far away from that source was that a typical level. And that changes in industry where you measure cars in one way, you measure lawn equipment is from wherever the operator would be. If it's not really determined, usually it's like at 3 feet away from the whatever source. Generators, they measure at 21 feet to make them sound better. So that decibel number is only a part of it. There's a whole nother component of it that comes into play, and that's the distance, which if we're picking a lot line, we're picking a random distance from the source, and that's going to affect what kind of measurements we see. So that was some of the issues that I just kind of hit on, and I was going to, but primarily when I'm going to skip through the definitions and the methods of measurements. I guess kind of hit on those already. But paragraph C was maximum decibel levels. So maximum means a different thing than average and how you measure it. Maximum's going to be a lot higher than the average, especially with a fluctuating noise. So that one, again, we use that wording, but is that what we really meant? And it basically, it's unlawful for any person to cause or allow the emission of sound from any source or sources which, when measured per their procedure, exceeds, and then we go on to define that. That says any noise. That's, if you're flushing your boat engine, your air conditioner, your pool pump, any noise, and if we're going to enforce this, is that what we really intend? And I'm not saying that's wrong there's communities that do that have these ordinances, and if I lived in a retirement community off on the side, yeah, I would love this noise ordinance. I don't think it's practical for the Isle of Palms, so then we're not going to be enforcing it when we decide what noises are, we're not saying offensive noises or anything, we're saying all noise. So that really kind of what really prompted me to come out and say something. The decibel levels, again, we can discuss and try to figure out what are appropriate decibel levels for different communities. And again, translating from what I would expect those sounds to be at a property line, I think I've got that kind of background, but I don't know what is reasonable for the island. I know what I think is reasonable, but I wasn't sure what a larger group, and I didn't ever see that discussion coming up in council. I saw a lot of numbers being thrown around, but coming to what those numbers really meant, I didn't see a real firm understanding of it, and I don't expect us to have a real good firm understanding of a number, a decibel number.
So David, on the decibels, I mean, I feel like the noise study was done. I mean, they are measuring decibels and recording those. I mean, you make it sound as though different.
So that, yeah,
like
so.
there's some black magic to figuring out the
This was kind of
decibels.
the things I sent you, said that we might get into. But so they were doing, actually, they sent me their raw data. And
Do you want me to put, I've got it here.
you can, I could kind of explain this a little bit better.
Is it this or is it these?
No, the chart's good.
Okay.
Is that so that was from noon to midnight. The red line is when I inserted, that was 60. That was just, again, a reference level that I wanted to kind of show. The blue line is an average. The green line is the maximum level that occurred during that 30-second interval. So they took averages for every 30 seconds and plotted that, because the meter itself is reading, depending on how it's set up, anywhere from once a second to 8 times a second. So it typically will average that to a 1 second reading, and then you'll average that over a 30-second or whatever time period that you choose. And all that will affect what level. So that was kind of where I was going on this chart. And the yellow one is the maximum that was actually occurred. Again, the green one's still kind of an average, but it's an average, the highest 1 second period average over the 30 seconds, where the yellow one is the actual highest level and it could have been less than a second long.
So
it'd be like somebody clapping their hands, slamming a door, will give you that yellow line.
So I understand that our draft said maximum.
Right.
But I think if I were interpreting that, and I know this is going to get squirrely with language, but I think it's talking about the maximum average. So in other words, we have a maximum, setback, a maximum building line as close as, you have to draw a line and say this is the maximum, but I don't think it's referring to the value of decibels. So I think I would have interpreted that to say that blue line can't be above whatever the number is, 75.
But yeah, that was just we need to clarify and spell out in how it's going to be measured and how.
So from my perspective, I think what I'm hearing you say, there are some real technical polishing, and you kind of
Right.
said, it looks like, and I think there's truth to this, different communities have borrowed it over time and kind of pick and choose different sections, and they don't all gel into a cohesive document, which I
Right.
think is, I would have never picked up on that, but that can all be fixed, right?
Yes.
I mean, that kind of technical polish can be applied to it. And at the end of the day, I mean, I guess we get back to kind of the high-level question of, do we have a decibel? If so, how do we choose what that decibel is? And I guess, am I hearing that correctly, that the group could decide on those questions?
I
and we
think
could
so.
produce a
That
document?
was, yeah, that's kind of where I was kind of going with it is, again, was it really intended to be all noise, or do we want it to be just music? Do we want to consider, some towns will have a different level for all noise and what they'll refer to what's it kind of goes back into the definition, music and voices to be tonal noises, and they apply like a 5 or 10 dB lower limit to those type of sounds over what you would call like air conditioning systems or pool pumps or whatever, just general noises that are in the environment. And again, I'm not saying that's wrong, because a lot of communities are focused, especially out west, that air conditioners are too loud. You know,
Well, when they have electricity, they won't have to worry about that anymore.
well,
Until your generator.
well,
goes off.
again, I don't know how many people lost power, but, you know, you hear the generators come on. And I do recall, for those that were around during Hugo, it was kind of interesting about 10 o'clock at night. It would just, you'd hear them all shutting down all through the neighborhood. Well, nowadays, they're automatic and they run and they stay running all 20, whether the person's there or not. Is that disturbing? Is that okay? I mean, my personal preference, I think we should do something about it, but that's, that was kind of a
Are we trying
question.
to regulate noise for 24 hours a day, or are we trying to pick hours of the day that there shouldn't be noise?
Well, that's, again, discussion. When I said the generators is, yeah, I don't care if you run it all day long, but, you know, 10 o'clock at night, if you got a cheap generator that's that loud, shut it off, or get a good one.
Or don't have people fix the wall in the marina, which is driving everyone crazy.
But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the discussions, like I said, I know what my personal opinion is, I don't know kind of on the group. And whatever we craft in a noise ordinance needs to reflect what we're trying to achieve.
When are the complaints made? Are they made at night or during the day or all the time?
They are consistently throughout the day, not just at night. And I did want to, you mentioned Windjammer earlier. We have not had a call in the police department, but the actual conversation with this ordinance did start with a complaint about the Windjammer. And we have not had any more as of recently, as far as I'm aware of. I think that has kind of been subdued, but just wanted to clarify that.
Sure.
But it's all hours. We get them during the afternoon.
I mean, I personally don't know how on the Isle of Palms someone can complain about noise during the day. There are lawnmowers, there are hammers, I mean, there's
So
construction
are leaf
everywhere.
blowers.
Sandblasting, I mean, there's all constantly. I don't know how you can regulate that.
There are cities that have ordinances in place that do provide some, you know, regulation to those.
I think some of those are temporary too. It's like, you know, the leaf blower, you know, the lawnmower, it's gonna stop. I mean, and the next one that kicks on will be a little further down and will not be as obnoxious
Oh, yeah.
versus the one across the street from you. So, I mean, you're looking at small durations of noise. So I kind of agree with David. If you could break it all down to target what we're trying to achieve, we can do that.
So on Jeffrey's question about kind of night versus daytime, you'll see in the way the draft was written and proposed, it was 60 decibels daytime residential, 75 daytime, and that's 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. commercial, 85 in the GC2 district daytime, that's the Windjammer, 55 decibels island-wide at night, so 10 p.m. to 10 a.m., and then 11 to 10 on Friday and Saturday night. So that's how the current draft tried to kind of deal with that.
So what is the zone for the origin of the complaint at the
So,
hotel?
and it goes by the use of the property, so that is so in the Sweetgrass Inn specifically, that is a commercial property, so it would be 75 during the day, 10 to 10, 55 at night.
And that's, did you say that's the same as the Windjammer?
Windjammer has a GC2, which is the front beach area, has 85 during the day. Same at night, same after 10, but louder in the daytime.
So it's able to be distinguished between the Windjammer and the Sweetgrass Inn?
Yes, the way it was crafted was to have,
That's my biggest concern. I mean,
car.
just off the cuff, is the Windjammer. I would hate to get into this. I mean, I'm worried we're heading down a little bit down the wrong path and getting too scientific here. If we come up with a one-size-fits-all, that it's going to be detrimental to an institution that's been around since the 70s. And I know a lot of people are going to be upset. Not saying that people can't complain. It sounds like have been some complaints on the Windjammer, but it's been around a long time. People are used to it. I wouldn't want to implement something by way of policy that allows somebody to take out a vendetta that could hurt the Windjammer. And that's,
But-
I mean, just getting down to brass. I think Ron was all over it. Maybe water under the bridge, but it seems like it could have been solved through zoning.
You have
I hate that we are where we are, because I think Mr. Klaus is probably well-founded in his complaints.
I see.
And this is like, hey, can't we all get along, man? But isn't there a way to encourage the Sweetgrass Inn to be a better neighbor without having to get super scientific with a island-wide noise ordinance refinement?
So I like to see the Windjammer, and it's insulated by the commercial district. It's not just the Windjammer by itself, so you have, that whole
Right.
area is commercial, so it goes beyond that. I see Sweetgrass as commercial. It's not insulated, it's all
Plop down around,
residential.
yeah, exactly. No, that's exactly
So-
my point.
In that respect, I don't think whatever, moving forward, I don't think the Windjammer in the commercial district will be adversely impacted. I do think that, Mr. Klaus has a point, and you have that one facility, and believe it or not, there are a lot of people that are full-time residents at Grand Pavilion. So there's nothing, they're just out there, bare.
And I guess I would add that the Wild Dunes, they have a planned development zoning. There is a zoning ordinance within Wild Dunes, has very kind of much looser control, but that area has always been a what they call a residential village. There've always been, in that document since the 70s, the allowance of hotels in that area. So, I mean, very much like a commercial district, that has always been on the books as the area that a hotel would go. And there, the Boardwalk Inn is there, been there. Reception site has been there, always there. The site of, I can't remember, the Island House, whatever was prior to the,
Oh, the old conference center?
yeah, the old conference center. So, I mean, that has always been the commercial, what they call the village of Wild Dunes, where the plan has always specified the commercial uses would go in that vicinity. Whether it was, and that plan development contemplated this kind of mixture of uses of houses being, kind of more like a downtown in the city of Charleston, where there is a mixture of uses where you have residential units adjacent to and near commercial uses. Doesn't seem to have worked out swimmingly in this exact situation, but, I mean, that has been the area of commercial allowable uses since it was established.
Most of their mixed use does not impede or intrude upon anybody else, like the conference center. It's primarily indoors. So when they have parties there, you have those walls buffering, and it sits by the tennis center. Grand Pavilion, they'll have a band on the weekends right out there at the beach, but you don't hear it if you go out there, the further down you walk toward the old hotel.
The residents at Grand Pavilion sure do.
Well, no, I've been out there. I mean, unless you're right there in the front by the band, which is right there at GP, and you can hear it a little bit at the beach too. But it's not as offensive, I think, as when you have something at the hotel or up top at the hotel where the noise just kind of comes down and then it just goes right down that pathway. Not to be targeting them, but that's probably where some of this is coming from. The noise abatement there is not as good as anywhere else in Wild Dunes or any of their other commercial facilities.
If I could, just real quick, I know the conversation before we kind of went down that was geared towards what we're measuring, a majority of our calls and complaints come from amplified music and voices. Very rarely do we get one about a device like a yard tool or something like that. We get them, but not very often. So when we look at that, just so you know, the majority that we get deal with that amplified music and/or a crowd of people that their voices just start to carry.
I'm also surprised at the hours in that proposal, because right now Wild Dunes doesn't allow workmen to start working until 8:15 or whatever, 8:30 in the morning. So I don't know where.
Yeah, there are different construction hours specifically. I guess I should have specified, when I was talking about those decibel ratings, that is different from construction hours, and I think they're like 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., I think.
Yeah, pretty sure it is, pretty close to
Is that the lawn maintenance people, they can be out there at 7 a.m.?
They cannot, not in Wild Dunes.
7:30.
Well,
No, they
Yeah,
have to wait till
probably.
8:30 before
Yeah,
they
they
start
have.
working.
I was always wondering about that, because there's some people
I
that
think
are
it's
pissing me
probably
off.
not.
Yeah, they
Oh,
start
yeah?
out, they know exactly, they have
Yeah,
their
they're
watches
all-
set, starting at lower.
The group that has permission to work at 7 a.m. now is the group doing the retaining wall. They got special dispensation to start early so they can get done with the damn thing.
Yeah, it's 7:30 a.m. to 6 p.m.
Oh,
So
yeah,
that's
we
what I'm
gotta
saying,
change
it's
that, man.
inconsistent between Wild Dunes and the rest of the island then.
Well, there are a lot of rules where Wild Dunes goes above and beyond the rest of the community. I mean, that's not unusual, where they have community standards that are different from the minimums. They can't relax a city rule, but they can certainly go above and beyond for, neighborhood standards.
So
it's not
similarly, this
unusual.
could be handled that way as well, the issue at hand.
If they-
I don't think by virtue, this is my very surface level understanding, is that the community association cannot control the resort. I think the resort started, they birthed the community association, so I think the way their power is they cannot.
So here we have the most restrictive community on the island with a resort,
Except for the
the
others.
transplanter right in the middle of it. They can do whatever they want.
Well, they have to
Herein lies the
abide by
problem.
the city ordinance.
Yep.
Can't do whatever they want.
Right.
No, they're more restrictive than the rest of the island is, except when it comes to their own stuff.
Interesting.
And I did just want to point out, when we're talking about the difference, when there's a time difference for Wild Dunes, we cannot do anything with their time difference. We can only enforce what's written in our city ordinance. Larry and the security can handle however they see fit for the other stuff.
So I think this has been a lot of information, and I think the council, I think they would like for a fairly quick review. I don't think that we need to have a special meeting or anything to get that done, but from my perspective, if we could get directional kind of head nods, for lack of a better term, about the sense of where the group sees themselves going, and then additional bits of information. I think David is clearly kind of identified technical deficiencies that I think we should work to polish up, but I guess going back to the kind of initial couple of questions, do we think there's a problem? That's, I guess, question one. And then second question for you, if the answer is yes there, do you all see establishing decibels as a path forward? And then I guess the third question, if that's a yes and a yes, is going to be, are the levels, times, kind of the technical parts, how do we get to those? I mean, we can talk about that, but I guess the answers to questions 1 and 2 would directionally be good for the staff, and then any additional information that you would need, other than the technical cleanup, we can work on that.
Well, my concern is we keep discussing all this, but if it doesn't apply to Wild Dunes,
No, it does apply to Wild Dunes. All of this applies to Wild Dunes.
Okay.
Wild Dunes, could have their own standards that are more restrictive. but they don't in this situation, so this will be the only controlling
Okay.
document in Wild Dunes on this particular issue. Setbacks, they have more restrictive setbacks, they have more restrictive appearance things, they handle all of that. But yes, this will definitely apply
Okay.
within Wild Dunes.
So, kind of now more on my thoughts on it. Just trying to get, looking back, in our ordinances and kind of ties into our comprehensive plan, which is, I kind of went back, it's like, what are we trying? And we look at the SR 1, 2, and 3 district, their purpose says that their single-family residential district to provide for quiet, low-density residential neighborhoods. 1 and 3 is on comparatively large lots. 2 is on smaller lots. But I look at that, and then it says to discourage unwanted encroachment by prohibiting commercial use and to prohibit other uses which would interfere with the development or continuation of single-family use. That's how we define our SR 1 and 2 and 3 districts. So I'm looking at how do we, should we be trying to protect those? Is that where we're really coming to an issue? When you get into the commercial districts, they basically are commercial use. What was different is when you look at the limited commercial and the PDD district, both of them use the word that to encourage the development, that's a commercial one, wait, of the PDD district is permit a mixture of different types of housing with compatible commercial uses. It's that word compatible that when you read that in our ordinances, can a hotel be compatible with a residential area? What limits do we need to be put in place to ensure that it is? That's kind of my question coming back is, when we say commercial or residential, it's commercial, but let's treat all commercial alike. But if we're talking about from a zoning perspective, we want to treat the GC2 different, so why not treat the other commercial zones? We can treat them differently with different noise levels.
Well, if you back up into a hotel, then you can have a higher noise tolerance.
Arguably.
Maybe it's 85.
Well, that's the hard, that's kind
I hear
of my
you.
point here is, do you
How do you
expect
draw the line?
where do you draw the line? And again, when we're taking noise measurements and what was proposed, it was on the complainant's property. So that doesn't, if we're going to talk about the Seagrass Inn and having 75, if you're taking that measurement 1 foot over on the other side on a residential property, then the residential criteria would apply, or at least that's the way it was written.
No, I think
we
That might have been the way
discussed
you interpreted it, but that's the way it was written, was it would be taken from the complainant's property. And if you're taking a measurement on the complainant's property, you would be using those guides.
Yeah,
It
we
didn't say
wouldn't be
from the
able to,
source.
because it has to be from where the source is coming. We can't hold, if we tell a business they can have it at one point, we can't hold them accountable for something else just because we're measuring it from another location. We did have that discussion in the planning, or the Public Safety Commission meeting, or committee meeting. I think we would find ourselves in a bit of a legal issue going down that road.
Douglas, as far as this draft is concerned, you want to move ahead with adapting it or adjusting it with what we've talked about tonight?
So I think based on your answers to questions 1 or 2, do we need to change the noise ordinance? Question 1. If so, is a specific decibel reading the way to do that as question 2? If your answers to those 2 are yes and yes, then this ordinance would be our starting point for going down that path.
The reason I ask is there's several things that disturb me about this, the least of which is just simply a couple of times in here, it simply says something about all noise, and it's, where is it? Unless otherwise specifically indicated, it shall be unlawful for any person to cause or allow the emission of sound from any source. I'm reading, where am I? Page 3, paragraph C. Or sources which may, when measured pursuant to paragraph B above, to exceed in a residential area, daylight hours, 10 till 10, 60 decibels. I don't think that's reasonable. I'm out there with my lawnmower. We already know lawnmowers are 90 to 100. Are we going to have some exclusions to Jeff's question earlier?
Then you get back to David and identifying the noise.
Well,
Well,
exactly.
And it could be done definitionally in the previous paragraph of definitions. What is the difference between noise and sound?
Right.
So if a noise is a nuisance, identifying what those are and the exceptions could be.
Well, I think,
Well, I mean, and that was another one. We do list exceptions, and basically it's construction activities performed by a government agency, evacuations, city-sponsored events. The one that, again, just because I thought it came out, was, I think it was intended to be construction, but the way it's worded, it says it shall be unlawful. It should be written as, it will be lawful to have construction activities between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Just again, that was kind of more of a technical thing. But, and then you go down that same paragraph, and it was nothing in this paragraph shall be construed to prohibit an owner or member, and this is actually out of our existing ordinance, same wording.
So David, just to back up, it shall be unlawful for any contractor, blah, blah, blah.
That's an exception, though, listed as an exception.
Of the
Right,
existing.
at
F, of the
the
existing.
Which
use
page
of
do
which
you
is
want?
attended
Oh, page
with
6,
loud,
number
it is-
4.
okay.
Oh, you're on 6.4, I was on 2.3.
But it says it shall be unlawful to generate loud and disturbing noises
At any time
at
other
any
than.
time other than.
It
Other than-
continues down till the, till nighttime.
Right,
Can't do it
but,
during nighttime.
but that's under the exceptions, and again, it's written as, that should
It's a
be.
double negative.
It's,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's
it's
a double
basically a
negative.
double
It's not
negative.
written right. It's not written well, but.
Again, that one, I think the intent was right and everybody, but when you actually go down to the bottom of that one, it's basically, nothing could be construed to prohibit an owner or member of an owner's immediate family performing maintenance, repair, or other work on their own property. And the reason I point that out is
Now you can mow your lawn.
I can do construction work on my house at 2 a.m. And the police cannot do anything about it other than,
That was,
Ask me
that
to
was a
be
very
quiet.
intentional add to that ordinance.
huh?
That was a very intentional add to the ordinance.
I realize that, but am I wrong in the way I would read that?
No, that's the way they wanted it to be. If you,
That
as
is-
your owner, if you wanted to put your roof on at night, you could do that.
And we've had it.
Right.
Better happen.
Well, that kind of, again, that was kind of a question. Did everybody realize that was that the intent?
That was the intent.
The-
Yeah, that was
I
very
didn't
intentional.
know that.
Emergency repairs at all hours.
Well, again, you could exempt emergency repairs, but,
And so that same paragraph, though, excludes the lawn people.
Can I say something?
It's almost as though the
Well,
lawn
since we're getting a
people.
lot of complaints from crowd noise and music, not getting a lot of complaints about leaf blowers in construction and that people putting on our roof at night. Right now, I think we need to concentrate on the music and the noise, and then we can go down from there. I mean, Mr. Cross's been here 22 times. Are we not hearing it? Seriously. I mean, I think we're taking this the wrong approach. All the complaints the chief said are from noise, or from music, and crowds.
Well, it gets back to,
So why can't we have, maybe they unplug at Wild Ends? No more loud outdoor
Right.
speakers.
Instead of
Windjammer
design.
tones it down just a tad.
Right, which I think, this starts to do, because you had the GC2 carved out, the commercial district, and then island-wide, we would need an ordinance for all other areas for that to tie.
But if we can get specific with the music and the crowd noise, then we can.
I think that'll
then
do
we
it.
can
Three
down-
zones.
We can go down the line to worry about a little bit more of the construction end or some of the other noise ordinance, but not that many.
Now, I do want to point out that we're having a lot of conversation about one location. The complaints are not only on that location. We
No,
get complaints.
Marine Edge.
island-wide about noise and music. It's not, that's not the only place we're getting those. We get them from Islander 71. We get them from a couple short-term rentals that we just know that we're going to get those calls on. So I want to make sure that Sweetgrass, when you look at our total numbers, is actually a small number out of those. We've had 6 founded at Sweetgrass this year and 8 unfounded at Sweetgrass this year that are documented.
But we don't have the numbers that the residents from Wild Dunes say if they call Larry and Les. So we don't have those either. No, it is a island-wide issue. I agree. But to David's point, define what it is for the noise. Instead of being general noise, define that noise. And then go from there, just like Tim said.
David and Tim, I guess, are you, and I think David, originally read your message to indicate that you were not supportive of the idea of having decibels, or
No,
or
I'm-
are you?
I'm okay with it as long as we
As
kind
long
of
as it's well
define
defined and,
Right.
what what the levels are. It was nothing against that in particular. It was more the discussion, throwing numbers out without really context. And that brought me up to question when you see somebody say, we want a level of 50 dB nighttime across the island, do you really, you're saying you want no noise, no mechanical noises, no, garage door openers, the
Right.
church bell? Because when you read other cities' ordinances that do this approach, they have 2 or 3 pages of exemptions
Right.
of, because they realize we're saying no noise unless it's these specific items. I don't think that's the right approach for us. But I do think, the question is, so that was my question was, I hear some of the conversations talking about a really strict noise ordinance that basically would severely limit noise on the island, and that's what some of this supports. Even in our current ordinance, like I said, it's just little things that I know, under the loudspeakers, this is under our current, I think this is still in this new one. Yeah, it is in our new one. It shall be unlawful to use, maintain, operate loudspeakers, sound trucks, amplifiers, or other mechanical or electrical devices for increasing the volume of sound upon the streets, sidewalk, parks, public places owned or under the control of the city.
There goes the ice cream truck.
Is a Bluetooth speaker
But-
a loudspeaker?
It's
Back when this
amplified.
ordinance was written in the 50s,
You have to have a permit.
you didn't have
though.
portable radios, but they alluded to that. So again, the way it's written, it's unlawful to have a loudspeaker or a Bluetooth speaker on the beach. Is that how we intended it? Again, I'm not saying I think that's what we should be, but I would think that if we actually had some reference to noise levels on the beach would help control large groups of people. And so we might want to have something reasonable of whether it's audible at 20, 25 feet or 50 feet, which would allow the police to actually stop loud music on the beach.
well, I think loud music, the beach is almost, well, it's actually in a third, we hadn't
Well-
talked about it, but we have residential districts, we have commercial districts, that is a conservation district.
And we have public areas.
Oh, that's,
So that would be like, the streets
that
and the
was-
beach. And the rec center, for that matter, would fall under that same category. And again, I don't think we have any intention to enforce that, but so why not change it?
What page are you on now?
Oh, sorry, I'm on,
page 5 of the proposed number 3, correct, David?
yeah, I was looking at the,
Loudspeakers in public spaces.
There we go, yeah.
But it's specific to control of the city, meaning city property.
city property, right.
So, is the beach. The public beach is not
park.
city property.
But it talks
The
about
recreation is,
Street,
here in this
sidewalk,
parking lot is.
park or other outdoor.
Under the
Public.
control of the city, because we
Yeah,
don't,
that's city property.
I think that's
the
At
beach
least
would
to have
qualify for
jurisdiction of the
that.
beach.
Well, we gotta fix that. Only kidding.
Let us drink beer again.
Exactly.
So what, Tim, how about your thoughts on, because I'm not positive I understood what you're about kind of unplugging at the Sweetgrass, is that,
Well, we could do it island-wide, just have no amplified music outside.
period, anywhere
You could do
outside?
acoustic, but no amplified music.
we
So
don't
when you
really-
get to, I mean, like a drum is not, I mean, I think you could still really create a racket. I don't
Yeah,
know
There's
that,
always people going to make it louder than it should be, but we can't control everything. But if you take the loudspeakers out of play, the amplification of it, then maybe it'll help some of the neighbors that are close by. You know, a drum is, you're right, it is very loud.
and what about just a stereo? Like at the, I mean, I guess you couldn't, well, I'm thinking it would be very tough to tell a restaurant or a place of business you can't have any music outdoors.
You know, acoustic.
You could have acoustic, and the
But how would a
issue with the
radio-
drum, you'd have to muffle your drum if you
Yes.
ever played acoustic music, or else the drum will just.
How would a radio
drown
play
out
into
the-
this? I mean, a radio, a stereo, a DJ, I mean, and my impression is that they kind of have music like all day, every
I
day,
would
and then
think
there's
if
a
this came from a
band.
radio, it would be fine. But if you're going to have speakers with that, that would be, I would think, amplification.
Yeah, I would classify a DJ with their mixed board and
Yes.
everything. So it's amplifying the music. That's why you got all those super cool controls.
Yeah.
But are we suggesting that we prohibit that?
We're just moving inside.
Yeah, or move inside.
So any electric music, any
Amplification.
music other than an acoustic instrument could not be outside?
Yes.
and see, I think that gets,
Electrically amplified, because you could always put a microphone on an acoustic guitar to get around that ordinance.
True.
Trumpets and.
But that would be amplified, right? I mean, you have to
That'd
be
amplified, so
completely.
electronically amplified.
well, that was kind of my point of what our current ordinance says, is that, you know, amplified music, and actually, part of the old ordinance.
Yeah.
Use, operation, and playing are permitted, the use or operation of playing of any radio, hi-fi stereo system, phonograph, piccolo, interesting one, television, or any, this is paragraph 5 of our old ordinance.
Yeah.
Or any musical instrument in such a manner or with such unreasonably loud volume in the circumstances as is disturb, and this gets back to why it's hard to decipher, reasonable person of ordinary sensibilities or the playing of such instruments in a manner as to disturb the quiet, comfort, or repose of any reasonable person of ordinary sensibilities in any dwelling or other residence. And that's the one the chief is having a hard time enforcing. So, but again, it kind of goes back to, that's pretty much any radio, whatever. To ban them altogether, I don't think is the right answer. I think we can come up with a dB level that's acceptable to play them at, and that would just apply depending on commercial, residential. So I think that's where you were trying to go.
Right, I think we could all come to a compromise, or, you know,
Yeah.
a reasonable sound level. We're just trying to, you know, protect the people who are close by in those commercial districts. Sometimes that music is just too loud. You can't even talk to somebody inside the party. It doesn't have to be that loud.
So that becomes kind of a question of, again, do you allow commercials areas to overlap, you know, or have the levels impede on the residential next to them? Or do you apply the residential standards, and the commercials that are on the edge of the border have to live with lower standards than their neighbor?
I would lean in favor of the resident.
I think when we had that discussion, I think we had legal kind of give an opinion on it, and theirs was that if you tell the business they can do that noise, that's what we hold them to, is the noise that you tell them they can do. Just because I'm measuring from somewhere else doesn't change what I've told them they can do.
But I also think that if, from my perspective, you would adjust, you have to craft the ordinance knowing that. You're going to be taking the reading from a home. I mean, I don't think.
Because you can't go on the
property-
commercial property to take a reading.
One restaurant's not going to call and complain about the other restaurant generally. I mean, you are taking the reading from a resident. You're going to always be taking the reading from a resident's property. That was and that's the standard for noise ordinances, I think, that the residential reading wouldn't be going into a commercial operation. But again, I think you can adjust if you come up with, and I think that's been the challenge, is coming up with the.
And I think there's ways to word it such that, again, depending on, because you're talking about a zone boundary, if we do it by zoning areas, like you said, the GC2 is allowed at a higher level than other areas.
Say like the P.
Yeah, I think that's already kind
Or
of,
Marina.
Yeah.
I think that's been accounted for in this draft by my reading of it. GC2 allows 85. Other commercial uses are allowed, whatever it is, and then residents, which would be still a lower standard.
I'll just say this, I want to reiterate, if there's something we can do in a vacuum without drilling into all the details to help Mr. Klaus out and the good folks around him, I'm all for it. I empathize, I can understand the complaint, I believe you. But if this in any way affects what goes on at the Windjammer, if we're not going to have outdoor shows anymore, then there's no way under the sun that I'm supporting any notion that would impact that negatively. So if there's a way we can isolate by the zoning or whatever we need to do, I'm all for it. But if this is going to be an island-wide thing that has to be implemented and, we're making people unplug at the Windjammer, there's no way I'm for it. No way.
But Windjammer hasn't always had those outside concerts.
Yeah, but they're great.
It
is true.
Don't get me wrong, I love the Windjammer.
They had other events outside that were equally as
Okay.
loud.
Maybe
They haven't had
volleyball,
this
wet
concept.
t-shirt contest.
Like I said, I don't want to get into the details, but I would just want to maintain that focus no matter what we do. I think that's only fair. So I'm not saying we can't get to a solution, but let's not forget.
Yeah, Douglas, I think what you've drafted here is a good start.
I didn't
don't-
draft it, by the way. This is coming out of.
So Matt did it. All right.
No, this is not.
Now we know.
You all are getting this after 11 months of other people working on it, so. it's
I'll rephrase.
Yeah.
What was presented to me from your office.
That is accurate.
I
It needs
think
work.
the 85 daytime at 10 a.m., 10 p.m., GC2 is about 5 decibels too low. I think it needs to be 90. I was thinking that the commercial
Marty-
area
that's
ought
the
to be
Marty amendment?
80. Yeah, and the residential during the day at 60, I think is, and we got cars that go down Waterway Boulevard that make more noise than that. I don't think.
That's actually what drives the background.
It's the duration.
No, I understand, but if you go back up and read how it is worded, it's any noise at all. And so if the chief were to have a zero tolerance, there's some things that my children might do that might meet and exceed that 60 during the day. In fact, I have a granddaughter that she steps on a rock, you're going to hear it over here, and I live a mile away.
So Sandy, what was so you were saying GC 290? What were your other
Yes.
suggestions? I meant,
80 on the commercial area. This is daylight, 10 to 10, basically. And I would like to see 70 on the residential.
It does offer longer hours on the weekends in the commercial district.
Till 11 on
Although I've
Saturday
been
and
to the
Sunday.
Windjammer on a Wednesday evening, but it
Right,
did seem like
Saturday.
it got quiet after 10.
So on the screen now is a page in your packet. This is and hopefully everybody looked at it, but the blue line, so these were measurements taken at the Sweetgrass Inn. Blue line are actual levels, and then you can see where they've kind of they've superimposed the hours of our ordinance as drafted. From my perspective, and there's a lot of explanation of these, but they occasionally hit over 70.
These are also,
Nighttime.
these were in February. I mean, no one is even outdoors in February.
They are
No.
odd times, the data was collected at odd times. I would be more inclined to have Chief Cornett out there with randomly taking decibel levels at random times.
In the summer.
Because of the data of this.
This might have been done by the same traffic engineer. but-
They have another set of data.
I'm just kidding.
Didn't they have some that were in June?
July. Yeah, because they wanted to.
Yeah, it was
supposed to
like
be
couple-
June. There's another
yeah,
set of data
another-
somewhere.
It's
Oh, yeah.
Those are June, that's
3
right.
weeks, it's February.
Yeah, this is the,
Early June and.
yeah, there's June. So same, similar, kind of the same result from my perspective.
So I think that's part of the ones that I actually got the stuff on. So it goes back to you, if you look at their line at 60,
So David,
That- well, no, stay on
this-
where you are, that was fine. Again, I would suspect if this is out by the pool, there were times when it got loud. The police aren't gonna be able to respond to them. So when you see some little, like, small peaks, those are where they hit above 60 dB for a minute maybe. If we set the level at 70, we're basically, why even bother put an ordinance in place? I mean, they have to get extremely loud, and it's going to be, and again, when we start throwing around numbers, I don't want to get hung up on the numbers, but those levels that you're kind of going through almost are at the level that, why even bother doing anything? Because he's not going to be able to ever see that kind of level most of the time that he shows up.
So starting somewhere, even though it's a high threshold, I think the input after the fact could be refined if it's necessary, but if it's found it's not necessary, then you've set a higher threshold and you're not, causing consternation in the community to the residents. I think these are too low, and I'm basing it on the little bit of research I've done with different pieces of equipment. I think my air conditioner runs higher than 70, the noise from my air conditioner.
That's why
It depends on how far actually looking into that thing.
Well, exactly.
That's why I think we should define noise. The chief just said his calls are
I mean,
music
that's not
and-
what you're gonna get a call about unless it's me and it's my neighbor's unit that I can't sleep.
But for the most part, what is defined as Dr. Rubin said, it's nuisance. So define it. And then we can go from there.
Is two people standing out on your next to your property line, having a conversation like we are here at 2 a.m, disturbing to you if you're laying in your bedroom window again 10 feet away from it? And
It
that's-
can be if my
Loud
house
or
was built
excessive
for.
noise, which unreasonably interferes with the comfort, response, health, and safety of the people that are hearing it.
I mean, that's what we have now. We're just having a hard time enforcing it, but,
That's the problem.
It's
That's-
harder
that's
to
the argument,
defend
is
an
enforcing it.
enforcement than it is anything else.
right.
And that's why that's why we took it to, and that limited the hours for the entire neighborhood. Because if you make quiet hours, they're quiet. You can't enforce in a resort noise hours around a pool with 4 million kids. I'm sorry.
But you can't control amplified music.
Well, amplified music is a different, that's why you have quiet hours. It can't be outside after 10 or 11 o'clock on Saturday and or Friday and Saturday. I mean, you just have to limit it. And what are most of the problems you all have?
How much time you got? May I talk?
Yeah, you-
Sure.
Sure. Number one,
Mr. Klaus, you should probably come up to the microphone just so YouTube can pick you up.
Is that a threat or a?
Just an
number
offering.
one, Mr. Marty, I apologize, I can't see your last name there, but we have never, ever wanted to include the Windjammer in our situation. In fact, we are on record stating that our situation is not the Windjammer. Leave the Windjammer alone. I have documentation that I can show you. It's on file. You don't want to see all these past.
Well, good, we're on the same page on that one then.
Yeah, well, because it doesn't, the Windjammer does not affect us. The Windjammer's a commercially zoned area. It's been there 50 years, and all the area around it has been commercial. The residences that are there, even though maybe they're STRs, I don't know, when they were approved with the understanding, now you understand, you're
Sure.
in a commercial zone area here.
Exactly.
And that's why you don't get a lot of complaints, because the people understood that.
Which is what makes your situation uniquely different. It's a,
Very much
it's
so,
a new
yeah.
occurrence,
Now,
it's a new bill.
people went to the Windjammer 50 years ago, and now we have a residential established community, and I need to delineate something here. It is not just Wild Dunes. Mrs. Williamson, who is 25 foot from their property line, she's on 57th Avenue. For 57th Avenue, Mrs. Krause, Krase, no relation, they built their dream home. They had to sell their house because of all the commotion that was going on at the Windjammer. It just recently closed. So we get a lot of situations where we're talking, if you look at the ordinance, in a sterile environment, 9-2-5, B and C, amplified music. It is not allowed. It's that simple. And with all due respect, Kevin, these aren't going to the South Carolina Supreme Court. It's not going to happen. And I have been in the current municipal court here, and I've seen how the court is conducted. And you're saying that we have a case now that is being contested, and it's a noise issue. And I respect that. I respect what you said there. How many people are going to contest a noise violation? Now, we need to be fair, we need to be accurate, and we need to have data that supports where we are. But originally, the resort had the administration convinced that I was an unreasonable person. And conversely, what happened is that there was no enforcement. We would call, nothing would happen. This started in March of 21, not in April of 22 when I first presented to the Public Safety Committee. And when I presented to the Public Safety Committee, you know, I was a neophyte. I'd never done anything quite like this on a governmental basis. And I said to Mrs. Anderson, what can you do for us? She said, we'll get back to you. Well, she never did. So subsequently, about 4 months later, I started with City Council. That's a fact, okay? You can look at it on the YouTube video. But we get situations where we have, right now, they're playing music along the perimeter of their hotel. I can hear it on my screened-in porch. They've got a subwoofer, and Chief Kevin has talked before about how it's difficult to monitor subwoofer decibels. And, you know, I mean, you guys and gals know they use subwoofer in certain torture camps. And so you can just imagine, I mean, and so we just want to be on our screened-in porch and be able to enjoy the cicadas, okay? It's that simple. We have been wakened up at night at 11:30, at 1 o'clock. and partly because the resort does not know how to regulate itself. And so, you know, there's outdoor concerts. I talked about the concert from hell in November of '22. Now let me tell you something here, and this is the God's truth. We called complaining. The band was probably 70 foot from our residence. It was pointing towards the hotel, and Douglas gave me a heads up on this. We talked about it 2 days before it actually happened. So here we are, we're watching a TV program, and they start up, and I mean, you can imagine the bass, the vibration. Mrs. Williamson, her windows and doors were rattling. I called the police. Very nice people came to the door. We expressed our situation, and all along, man, I mean, they are banging. So they come in, and I happen to have a decibel meter. They wanted to know what the decibels were, which we don't even have in the ordinance now. It's not a decibel event. They wanted to know and they shot them with their body cams, which, who cares what the decibels are if I have the TV going at 60% and I can't hear the TV because of what the music is outside? I mean, let's use our common sense. If you're bothered, you're bothered. Yes, we're talking about amplified music is what our concern is. It's amplified music. I managed a municipal pool for 2 years back in the day. I'm around kids all the time and the pool noise. And I think most of you do understand, when noise hits water, it amplifies greater than if you were just in this room and hearing an amplification. So as the noise spreads over the water, it gets greater. My contention is the source, we need to, if you're going to go with decibels, the source needs, you need to measure from the source, 10 foot from the source, 20 foot from the source. That is where it's coming from. Don't depend on gravity to slow it down enough. If the resort gets this window of allowing gravity to slow the noise down, then they will push the envelope as far as they can. I've had many people tell me that, Al, it doesn't matter what you get past because they're going to do whatever they want to do anyway. I guess all we could do is look at past experiences, and those statements are very true, unfortunately. So you have to understand that it's not just Wild Dunes, it's also the people that live on 57th Avenue. And you've got, I think, 16 properties. We have 16 properties in Tract A, Block D of 57th Avenue. So, you know, we've heard everything. We've had it all. We've had everything happen. And we want to be fair, but we have not, we don't deserve to be disturbed by their music. We don't deserve that, folks. And, you know, maybe we need to get out of Dodge. I don't know. So anyway, any other questions? I apologize for.
But thank you.
So I think I would point out, and Mr. Klaus, the section you referenced was 925B, is that correct?
And C.
And C, and at the end of both of those, it does start out, it shall be unlawful for any person to play, operate music instruments, and then at the end, it says, in such a manner as to be plainly audible in any adjacent street, right-of-way, residence, and then it explains what plainly audible will be, and it's a reasonable person of ordinary sensibilities. So that is the crutch of the problem. The ordinance allows it, but then it says, allows it to be at a level that would be acceptable to a person of reasonable sensibilities. And that's really the challenge of an officer responding. Is this reasonable? So back to the chief's point of, it's a very subjective.
That one in itself actually is pretty well written, and it's pretty common. It's been defended in most courts. I think the one that actually, the next one down was the one I saw that kind of conflicted with what you should not do in an ordinance.
The daytime.
Are you on the older?
I'm on the older one, actually.
Old C, so, page 2 of 3, I'm not sure what page, I've got them printed, I'm not sure
You
which.
got 2 or 3.
Yeah, I'm on, oh, yeah, I tried it.
Amplified music daytime play, correct?
So the daytime,
When
the
that's,
thing that.
I think, the main one that causes,
The thing that really throws that one off is it puts in the comment of such an unreasonably loud volume in the circumstances. And that comes to question is it unreasonable for a hotel pool to be that loud? Where the one before doesn't account. It just says if it's in your house, you hear it.
yeah.
It's plainly audible. That just means that the police would have to come into a person's house to verify they can hear noise coming from wherever.
But the code definitely doesn't say you cannot have amplified music. I mean, I guess my
Right.
point is.
It doesn't say you can't have it, it just says, yeah.
It's got to be reasonable.
Yeah, but it doesn't, that's the reasonable part that doesn't get defined is where
Right.
it says in those circumstances. And again, if you interpret that as what's reasonable for a hotel pool, the officer's got to say, well, I've heard other pools that loud. I can't really write it won't hold up in court.
Right.
But again, that was just a particular wording in our current one. The paragraph, again, before it, there's, from what I've seen, that one's pretty well defensible.
That's the one that's being challenged right now.
The plainly audible one?
Yes, because it reads unreasonably loud or disturbing in the circumstances to a reasonable person. Who's a reasonable person? Who defines that? And, I might find one thing not unreasonably loud, somebody else may find it to be unreasonably loud. That's where the.
No, it
issue
says
comes from.
detected by a reasonable. It doesn't matter if you think it's loud, it's can you hear it?
Unreasonably loud. What's unreasonable?
Which one are you on?
I'm on A.
Oh, are
Oh,
you?
He's
wait.
on,
We're on
he's
B.
on,
He's on B.
I was on
B
B,
is
the
good.
10
Okay,
to
I'm sorry.
10. Yeah, the 10 to 10 I said was written very, very well. The other two
Okay.
are not.
I'm with you. Okay,
Yeah.
we're saying the same thing.
We're saying the same
Apologies.
thing. The other two
it's
that are
C
written
that's
like
being challenged,
reasonable,
correct?
yeah,
Yes.
Correct, chief?
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you.
okay.
Right.
All right, directionally, we like decibels, we don't like decibels?
It's the only objective measure that's readily available.
You have to use it.
Unnecessary evil?
I think you've got to put something down.
I think you gotta
Use
define,
decibels.
I think you gotta define what you're putting the decibel to, what noise.
So I was going to say, what I kind of wrote in my letter and proposed is, and I've seen that done in many, is both definitions. When I was looking at the nighttime one, and I'll explain the rationale behind that, was part of the concern is if you're out on your porch, it becomes, do we want the police to be proactive or reactive? So at night, do you have to have a complaint, or can they just write a ticket when they hear a noise? Which means we're, again, kind of putting it on them to determine, is this, you out there listening to your TV on your porch, is it too loud? Well, if your neighbors hadn't complained, is it really too loud? So the way I was kind of presented was you had to have both cases, a complaint and a measurement. So that somebody complained, that gives them I have a written complaint, but they can also show that with the dB level, that noise was at a level that we deemed could be unreasonable to somebody inside a house. So again, I've seen that used. I thought it was really well. The daytime, I actually switched and said
two different conditions. One was using the plainly audible, I think I said 200 feet. So if I can hear somebody playing music by their pool 200 feet, half a block away, it's too loud. Also with a related decibel reading that would support also somebody called and complained in the daytime when the officer could be the one that actually hears it from a block away and take a dB reading, but either one would be suffice.
So David,
And I thought that was a reasonable approach. It gives people an idea of what is too loud. Like I said, if I can hear somebody out playing in their pool a block away, I'm disturbed. It doesn't matter if you're disturbed or not. We're saying it's too loud. Kind of leaves it up to if you complain, you're disturbed. That's kind of the way I read it, is if you're going to the point of calling the police, you're apparently disturbed. We don't need to say that.
What are your thoughts on that?
So
I definitely, I like the two approaches there. You get a complaint, and then we have a measurable as well. I think that gives us two things to present in court. We got a call, and when we responded, not only we get a call, we saw that they violated, and this is our evidence that they violated that. I think that is easy to defend and a much stronger language than what we have now for us.
so general directional consensus on that? And then, because now, if that's a yes and a yes, and now we get to the hard third question, and we can work on this another time, or we can talk about how to get to it, is what is the right level? And that, from my perspective, that seems to be the paralysis comes and just, I mean, because it does seem somewhat pulled out of thin air, 75, 70. I mean, we can, we have charts, we have other ordinances, we have studies. From my standpoint, it always seems challenging to pull that number out to put it.
There are no consensus numbers at all. Every number is all over the place. You have to just pick one and live with it.
All right, what's the number, Jeffrey?
I say 75.
With quiet hours?
Does anybody here know if I played
75 is
If I
loud.
played a song on my iPhone right now, could anybody tell me within 30 decibels what they were hearing?
I think you just hit the nail on the head. We're not gonna know.
David is the only one.
I think I could, but
A lot of reason.
65 has been measured, in some reports was always deemed unacceptable. 70 is
always loud.
basically disturbing. That was the consensus that we got to from reading 400 studies. Every city's got them. They're all different. You got 4 reports here, all are different. This is different than anything I've got.
Do on average.
So you just have to, it's somewhere between 65 and 75. Pick a number. Doesn't matter.
So most cities that I've come has gone from 45 being extremely low up to about 60 or 65. And what I've read is setting it at 65, you might as well not even bother.
Right now, we're averaging 62.
So
I would believe that.
70 is a good number. 70 is the disturbing level according to ENT physicians.
What about,
But at
Well, we
night
should-
while you're sleeping,
You should measure that
yeah.
from the back of the room.
Oh,
Yeah,
so
go measure us.
the environmental says 55 at night.
your normal indoor level is 45 at night, unless you have an air conditioner or a TV going or something else.
I would disagree. Your normal level inside at night is between 30 and 35. If you're running your air conditioner and you have a decently built house, it'd be 40.
so David,
that's
what
why I
about
was-
this chart is showing middle of the night with nothing, I presume.
Down
It's
to
always
about
above
50.
50.
Just the background.
Just background
Considering
noise.
where they are in relationship to the
You've got
ocean.
the ocean, you've got,
And that was another issue is Front Beach is going to be probably 50 to 60 depending on the night. It will vary in that range. Backside of the island, you'll probably see levels typically around 30 to 35.
Well,
We've
no.
got to deal with that
Now it's
issue.
cicadas.
We did take a measurement of the beach, the ocean coming in, and it was 54, just the
Yeah.
waves
Yeah.
on the beach, just out of curiosity.
Normal
Yeah.
outdoor level is
But it
55.
turns out the windjammer. That's good.
Well,
so it's
just as a
55,
general-
let's start with the easiest number. Is 55, I think 55 at night is what we have, correct? And do we want to solve, I mean, we have other things on our agenda? Do you want to continue this, or do we want to wait on drilling down on decibel? I mean, from my
I'd
standpoint.
like to wait.
I think from my standpoint, I mean, Sandy was nice and brought this, but I don't know that we were anticipating getting to nailing down a number tonight. So I think we've done good to get to a point where we agree kind of generally a decibel rating, and we'll talk about how to choose a number. I mean, we have studies, we have, and I don't know if it could be done. We talked to consultants about this kind of paralysis of picking a number. They suggested having somebody like David Cohen come in and set up a system and just hear it, measure it, hear it, and you guys kind of say, that's reasonable, that's unreasonable. I mean, from my perspective, that's the only way. Otherwise, I think it would be completely just relying on what others have done.
Well, the problem with picking a number is everyone's house is built differently. Everyone's surroundings are
But
different.
we're taking it from a property line. So we're not taking it from inside your house for that reason. An old house, windows open, windows closed. So that is the reason. I mean, we'll have to kind of frame the noise of, imagine you're standing at your fence and you live near, probably.
And
gonna say-
again, that's kind of going to be a difficult thing to do is, I'll use the example of how many people have ever heard the Sullivan's Island foghorn at their house. You don't hear it all the time, but under certain conditions, you can hear it. I'm not saying it's loud or disturbing this far away,
It
but,
should be disturbing. That's why it's out there.
well, if you live on Sullivan's Island, it probably is. But the background environment determines what you're going to hear. So even when we start looking like and the issue becomes, it's like driving your car on the interstate, and then you pull into town, and you realize your radio's real loud, and you turn it down. That's kind of the same thing that happens, it's going to be those quiet evenings when we set a level real high that it's going to be disturbing. If it's pouring down rain outside, 75 dB coming from my neighbors, I'd never hear it over the background noise. But
So the
those
rain
times,
itself,
yeah,
beats
so
it.
that affects, I guess it's going to be hard to set a level, but, I mean, it's not impossible, we can't do it, but that's got to be a consideration.
So
Again, if
could
we
you,
set a-
David, could you, for our next meeting, set up a stereo back there and say, this is 55, whatever our numbers are, 55 and 75 at your seats? I mean, I'm asking not facetiously, I don't know, can that be
No,
done?
I mean, yeah, that can be done. We can kind of generate a background noise and,
Would that be helpful for you all to know what?
Can we use an official decibel reader?
And again, I think we would get the official reader.
I don't have an official one.
But we know
talked to-
somebody to get one from.
We've got a couple
good
different
one.
devices. Yeah, we've got a pretty
I don't know
decent
if it's
one. Our most
ANSI.
recent ones were much nicer than the first ones we bought for $20 off Amazon.
That's okay, whatever you use, it would be nice.
So we're
to
gonna
use.
have a decibel setting session. If that's agreeable. And
that a
between now and then, David, also gonna lean on you for technical polish on the things we talked about. Readers, I think we have the wrong ANSI references.
Yeah, that's, from what we've discussed, I kind of see we're looking at a nighttime level, which would be pretty much island-wide. Hours are kind of debatable. The residential daytime, a front beach daytime, and the remaining commercial, which I would assume would include, again, if we did it by zones, it becomes so difficult, is Wild Dunes, it's got a level, period.
Well, Wild Dunes, I mean, from my perspective, Wild Dunes very much,
It's
the Windjammer was created in 1972, I happen to know, because it was the same year I was born. The Wild Dunes Commercial District was established in 1973. I mean, it was put into our bylaws that there would be a hotel up to 350 rooms in that area in 1973.
So
Well,
I guess what I was saying, it would apply that mid-range between the residential.
It would be, it is a commercial. it
The whole
is-
thing would be treated as commercial.
Yeah, the
And
land
if-
use map on the Wild Dunes PDD stamps commercial in that area. So it's a commercial use, it complied with the PDD. It is, it is not a traditional commercial zoning district like the GC1, GC2, but our ordinances definitely called for commercial uses to be in that area.
So the way you've written the draft, if I may real quick, is you have the residential, you have the commercial, and you have the GC2.
Correct.
So Wild Dunes would fall under that commercial establishment that
That's
you have
correct.
here.
It intentionally does not
C1,
call out
2.
districts other than the GC2 Front Beach District. It goes by the use of the property. So if it's commercially used, which a hotel, those uses are commercial, it's the commercial standard. If it's residentially used, which would be it's multifamily residential, it's 1 and 2 family. So there's a residentially used standard and a commercially used standard. And then there's the carve out for GC2, which is the Front Beach Commercial District.
What else is commercial?
So the restaurant, the
Shopping
The-
center? Or
the-
is that a GC?
yes, the rest of the commercial core is GC1. So everything Front Beach is GC2, but
Right.
all of this, the Harris Teeter, this is all GC1. Breach Inlet, Boathouse, GC1. Marina at the end of 41st, GC1. So
So
they
the
would all
only
be treated.
commercial entities are those in Wild Dunes, as we're describing in here?
No, all of those commercial uses. So a marina, restaurant, boathouse, shopping center,
Okay,
all of those
I
are
got it.
commercial uses.
Okay, so in essence, you're calling that GC1, and then number 3 here, you specifically call out GC2.
Yeah, there's kind of generically
Okay. All
commercial,
right.
and then specifically just the Front Beach has
I was
an
throwing
allowed.
that.
Yeah, my only reasoning for tying it actually to the zoning as opposed to calling it commercial residential is you could have challenges based on the use of the property of whether, because we do allow, there are some commercial uses in, in residential areas.
There are commercial,
There's home businesses. Are those commercial or
no,
residential?
those are, in our ordinance specific, those are home occupations that are allowed in residential uses. Very much
What about
incidental.
churches or,
Yeah.
Yeah, churches would be another one that, again, you're saying, but if we just limit it to the actual SR1, SR2, SR3 and treat them as that, there is no, wiggle room. You're defining this as a residential area by its boundaries, no matter what goes on inside it.
Yeah, but how do you account for the commercial?
So any commercial within a residential zone, any commercial property within an SR1, 2, or 3 would be limited to the noise requirements of an SR1,
the rest
2,
of
But how
and
do you
3.
deal with the PDD, which is not,
Well,
it is a mixed use?
Well, that was my
Zone.
question. You put it, you either lump it in as a commercial and
Or
let the
residential.
internal homeowners association regulate below that. Because that's really all we could do. We can't treat it as pieces.
right.
I don't know what the benefit of differentiating residential zone or residential properties. That
Just-
seems,
I think-
that seems much more,
It's more black
Much
and white, it's more
clumsier.
black and white because we define zones on a map.
whether you got, this is police officers showing up without zoning maps. They don't have zoning maps, and that we wouldn't expect, we don't,
So basically, I
a
would see.
residential property versus a commercial property is, from my perspective in the land use world, as black and white as it gets. And that's something that an officer and the layperson understands, not starting to interject mixed-use plan development districts into police work.
but just consider all the wild dunes as, if you segregate all the commercial districts, our general commercial districts 1, 2, and 3, everything else then will have this, which would be the equivalent of our residential, and that would be true then of the whole remainder of the island. So the PUD would just end up being absorbed into the equivalent of our SR1.
But it allows, I mean, what would the justification be of saying we're going to allow you, our codes allow you to build commercial uses, but then on the other pages of the code, it holds you
We
to,
allowed them a hotel, that's porters and valets, and I don't think they're causing the noise ordinance problem. You know, there's no guarantee that you could have a bar or restaurant with bands outside.
well, I mean, it allows, their zoning allows restaurants, bars, allows a wide
Yeah.
mix of commercial uses in our ordinances.
Yeah.
I mean, it definitely contemplated a commercial core for Wild Dunes. To then, I mean, from my perspective, to allow it, it's always been in their plan. They build it. And then literally 50 years later, we say, well, you know, you can do it, but we're going to hamstring that component of it to a residential standard.
Are hotels and venues classified differently? Because you can have a hotel, and people, I think, assume that it's a hotel where you go spend the night, maybe get a restaurant, maybe there's a bar inside, but they don't really think that it's a wedding venue or
An event venue?
an event
Yeah.
venue. Because I think that's what Wild Dunes has kind of turned into.
Correct.
A hotel is fine, if you go to bed, go out to the beach, go shopping, whatever. They've turned it into a destination point, a venue, where they put things outside. And they've moved from the confines of their hotel out to the porch, out to the grounds. They keep moving it out, getting closer to the residents. So is there any kind of distinction between a hotel and a hotel that has, a venue, so to
Yeah.
speak?
Events is-
I mean, if it were not, there is a provision in the city's code in the regular commercial district that has outdoor activity. You have to get a special exception. It's an additional approval to have outdoor.
On something like Wild Dunes, could we put that in there, that it's no outdoor activity unless you get a permit? Or it's-
Well,
Because of the proximity.
we have just modified the plan development for other reasons, so I guess you can modify, but, you know, when you change an ordinance after something is established, it is considered a legal non-conforming use, so even if you were to change it, it still is legal and grandfathered, and, but you could stop it from happening again. I mean, you could, and I don't know what the number of units left is, but the plan development allowed up to 350 rooms. I think they've built, I don't think they're there yet. I mean, you could certainly stop future things with ordinance changes, but I don't think it would have an effect of.
Yeah, and how does that impact your churches with weddings and receptions and the other things that go on? You've got the Citadel Club down there that's doing the same thing. I don't know how.
But they're clubs and
They
they're
might-
churches.
yeah.
We're talking about a hotel.
They have space, too.
Yeah, same
Yeah,
thing. I
they
mean,
have space.
restaurant.
I mean, to
Clubs.
get,
Exchange clubs.
if you wanted to start an event center in the county of Charleston, I think they have a minimum requirement of like 8 acres.
Right.
Because I've had some clients who wanted to do wedding venues, and that's just a big no-no. And everybody always just assumes it's going to then turn into a band venue. And, you know, because of noise, they want space. And, you know, because they've become so popular and so complaint-oriented, they're really, you know, kind of restricted quite a bit. But
But would that
Yeah.
apply to a restaurant with I mean, I think pretty much every restaurant, every hotel built today has a bar, a restaurant, a meeting
you
place.
stay in nice places.
I mean, I think that is just generally
That's right.
goes part and parcel with a hotel.
Do we know how many residents are being impacted for the issue at hand?
how many residents from which calls are being generated from? I mean, it's probably easy to see on a map if I look at a map and understand it.
In reference to Sweetgrass?
Yeah.
Well, we have one consistent caller, and then I think we've had 2 others that have called sporadically, maybe 3, but the only consistent caller is Mr. Klaus.
But we don't know how many have gone to the Wild Dune Security Office.
Correct. The other ones could be calling Wild Dunes. Mr. Klaus is just, we have asked him to call us, and he's been very, very gracious and does that every time. He's very forthcoming in helping us with that.
Okay.
All right, we're ready to, David's gonna help polish. David's gonna set up a noise X exhibit, and we're gonna focus on trying to set a limit. But I think 3, we're talking about, is it 3, or 4 different limits? Residential, commercial, GC2, and nighttime. So 4 different limits is what we're talking about. We'll do that.
3, 4.
And I would say that's good work on item 1 on your agenda. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Figured that was gonna be a long one. So how pressing is stormwater?
Well, let's, the rest of these should be very quick.
Yep.
I mean, we could spend some time on stormwater. That's kind of that's the one that would require the most attention to you, but I think you can give that attention at a future meeting. You will see in the packet a page of recommended changes from our drainage master plan consultant, Davis and Floyd. They have wrapped up their master plan project. Part of that project was looking at our existing codes and advising on what they feel like could be improved. And again, I've printed it, so I'm not sure what page that is on the packet, but if I get to it. And I will say that they're by and large pretty, I think they're fairly easy until we get to there's one that basically would say you have to have an engineer, if you're going to add anything, you have to provide additional storage for anything that you add in. So if you add in 100 cubic yards of dirt, you have to provide 100 cubic yards of storage, basically, so a depression. So at the end of your development, you may have pushed, if you think about a balloon that you push in one place, you have a depression and you have an equal amount of elevation in another part of that balloon. So that's an interesting, it's an interesting concept, and I think, but the other ones, I mean, to me, they're fairly easy to achieve, and I think most of them are good. There's one in here about hiring a third-party engineer. I don't know if that one would take a little thought, but the first one, we currently have an ordinance that says you can only elevate your lot to 1 foot above the road. We have had instances where a road is like 2 feet underwater at a high tide. They felt like to require, or to limit people to an elevation that we know is still below high tide for a brand-new house is short-sighted. So they are saying, keep that standard except in situations where the road is so low, and then allow them to go, and I don't have my readers, but
7.4.
7.4, yeah. So in any situation, you could get up to at least 7.4. That's the first one. The second one, I would say this is, and we very rarely have this, our ordinance says you cannot decrease existing ground elevation, so you can't take away dirt. I don't know why that's in there. We've never really had an issue with people hauling away dirt. Our problem is usually the opposite. I think that's probably designed to keep like cellars. I mean, I think that people out here know that it would be short-sighted to do like a subterranean cellar out here. Maybe it was just to protect against that, but
I was just gonna say, no, I'm thinking swimming pool as you're talking.
yeah, I mean, maybe that's,
Or
Maybe,
homes
but-
built on big sand dunes that, if you're back in the old ordinance where you could build from 40 feet from the center of undisturbed virgin soil or the street.
oh, maybe it's that.
If you were up, 20 feet above the road and you could only build a 20-foot high house, somebody might be compelled to mow the dune down to build a house.
Mm.
So it could have been, but I don't.
Or maybe if you're measured above the road, maybe you get an extra floor out of
Right.
depressing your slab.
Right. Yeah, which
Hadn't that been done around?
I did it once.
Yeah,
in a
it
while.
happens. I mean, it does happen occasionally. So we didn't, that's because we didn't realize this standard was in the code, because we've allowed people.
I was gonna
mean,
say,
if
there's a
they've
couple
dug out-
around me where people have, where they've dug
Dug out.
to put the garage at
Yeah.
the street level, and
So why are you getting rid of that?
Didn't make sense.
Doesn't really make sense. It's not, I mean, I can't think of any problem that it solves for.
That's not self-inducing their own problem, if it is.
Yeah, and it's probably creating a different problem. But we can
Well,
talk,
If you've got a high side to your lot and a low side to your lot, is this restricting you from moving?
again, that happens. I mean, if somebody
Well,
wants
no, I
to,
know.
yeah, if somebody has a dune on their property, it'll be set kind of in that dune and but,
Okay.
so we don't think that's a necessary thing to be in there. Any decrease in a lot's ground elevation is
Can we
prohibited.
go back real quick?
Yes.
I'm confused on the 1 foot. You have you're limited to only bringing in 1 foot of fill dirt, period.
No,
This is allowing,
No, 1 foot above the road is what you're currently allowed
Okay.
to bring up to 1 foot above the road.
So if you're already a foot above, you can't bring in fill.
Right.
okay,
And I'll say that's
But-
worked generally pretty well, but these situations, and, you will
but
recall.
if you're still in an area where the road floods 2 feet and you want to be effectively 3 feet above the road so you don't flood, this is allowing that?
Yes, as long as
Up
3
to-
feet is no higher than 7.4 feet.
Okay, thank you.
That's correct.
The only thing that sucks about that is for neighbors potentially, if it's an older house
Well,
and then
but-
it disrupts the overland flow.
Then
It
you
could-
still have to resolve that, because you can't flow onto your neighbor's property. So
Yeah, that,
You'd have to,
But you can dam it under
yes,
this,
you're allowed to dam.
right?
You can
which-
dam,
which
you're
I
always
was-
allowed to dam,
Which I'm just saying is, could potentially suck
yeah.
for your neighbor. Because you could go 1
because
foot
his water will
above.
his water will never, no longer
His-
run
his-
onto that
yeah,
property.
His water won't run to your
I'm
property.
thinking you're flooding already if you're the neighbor and you got.
Well, I mean,
we do have that.
That has happened.
Where a property
I've got experience
naturally
with that.
has always run to their neighbor, and the neighbor stops it.
Yeah.
And it
I mean,
does
happened
create
to
a-
me.
Yeah.
It wasn't,
Yeah.
it wasn't a case where it really produced a flooding outcome,
Mm.
but technically speaking.
That does, and we actually had Davis and Floyd. We had a very outspoken resident. It was exactly that. And we had them kind of case study that to understand. I mean, it was a good exercise to fully understand how our ordinances are working, and they studied exactly that. If somebody's property naturally flowed in a direction and somebody stops it, is that a problem? And I think they determined can't really keep them from doing that. I mean, if they want to stop accepting your water, I think there's case law that would support them doing that. That was unrelated to this, but we asked them to kind of consider that as a thing to look at. Fourth one, third-party engineer hired to review development plans to determine if they're in compliance with land development regulations. From my perspective, the current land development regulations governing fill are fairly simple. We can put the onus on the designer in more complex issues. I do think there would be a need for that if we were to get into the next one, which is talking about kind of volumetric storage. So I would say, from my perspective, the third-party engineer is not necessary with our current regulation, but if we wanted to get to a more complex situation like what's being proposed in the last square, we might want to consider that. And that last one, as I was saying, it is, it requires an owner to keep a pre-construction volume the same of dirt. So you can kind of create high spots, but when you do that, you really should be digging the same volume out of, and creating a low spot. That, to me, I don't know how that would work on such small lots. But I don't know how that, I just don't know how that would work, but
Mount
thought it was an
Pleasant
interesting.
requires that in certain parts of the village.
I do see in select parameters, so they may have borrowed that from the
Yeah.
town.
And it does take, and generally, I think the town requires a civil engineer. Sometimes we've allowed
Landscape architects.
who are well-versed in that, and some are and some aren't, to resolve some of those issues. But, you're talking about lots even maybe smaller than most of ours, the 100 by 100 normal-sized lot, where they're having to self-contain all their runoff. And they're doing it with rain garden, what we call a rain garden, big old pit full of gravel. And
Is that problematic?
it's only waiting for the engineer to give you that report and paying for it.
Oh, getting the actual report.
Yeah, because they're,
But from a constructability,
it's not difficult to do, it's just knowing how to do it. And still, at the end of the day, you're really just delaying an inevitable. At some point, the ground's going to get saturated and none of it's going to work. More big flood events, our 1,000-year floods. But, for our rainy day flooding, well, we don't have too much of that here, but downtown Charleston, stuff like that would work for surface runoff, even in small contained places. But I don't think we have the volume of water containment that Mount Pleasant is trying to resolve.
do you know if their staff, do you have a perspective on if we were to do that one, would we need to have a civil engineer?
On staff in the city?
Well, or to
Or
review, a consultant to
yeah,
review?
Certainly you would.
Okay.
'Cause
So
is
it kind of
that-
pivots
they're
into a
getting
level. Hydrology?
Hydrology,
Yeah.
stuff like that. So, I've got a small little renovation project, commercial job, and I think we're resolving drainage for all of Lafayette and Heritage Village, because we're adding 100 square feet of extra square footage.
But isn't this
That's good old
different?
Mount
Isn't
Pleasant.
this saying if you're adding,
Yeah, if you're.
10 cubic feet, you're going to create a sink of 10 cubic feet, right?
Well,
Is that a different?
It could be, but, sometimes if there are bigger problems. I think of some of the properties on Hartnett that we've had people complain that are sinkholes. If you tried to resolve that, which you could, with these kind of devices, that would be a little bit more
All right,
more complicated.
So this is gonna come into play we're not built out. I don't know how many empty lots there are that are gonna be developed over time, but this is where you're doing a tear down.
Correct.
And a rebuild, so you're reanalyzing the whole footprint. Okay.
Right. Historically, we've kind of had 40 or so of those, 40, 50 a year, that this year's low. But that's,
I was thinking a civil engineer.
all right. So I think we good to hold on a deeper discussion on those until your next meeting? The date, and I think I sent you all an email, but if I didn't, the city council reviewed the planning commission's recommendations, which are summarized, I think it's the last page, or the second last page in your packet, you all recommended 4 items. They were reviewing those, and from my perspective, there was a fairly quick and easy, I think they kind of bought in pretty quickly to 2 and 3. Marty, unfortunately.
Yeah, I want to know what those unintended consequences are. It says too many unintended consequences. What are we talking about? What are they?
There was not a lot of support of number 4. And I mean, we kind of talked about it here, the idea that low density, I did my best for you, Marty. I explained it was the city's model, you would control what happens in your own house. I think they felt like,
Hey, just fact-based argument. I'm just curious what the fear of unintended consequences entails. I'll look at the video
all
footage.
right,
see.
well, you're going to be in a room with them, so you can
Get it straight from the
directly
horse's mouth. All right, fair enough.
So,
September 26th,
September 26th, is that right?
5 PM.
5 PM. So, and I would say their focus then is really number 1. And that seemed to be where they kind of got, and I will say that from my perspective, the idea of number 1 does a couple of things. Right now, when somebody rebuilds, they substantially improve, and the house, that property had a license in 2010, I think. We go back to whatever it had in 2010, and we allow that for the new structure. This changed that to say, if you substantially improve, you build a new house, or the license lapses for a year or more, you get kind of retroactively reduced your occupancy, and the traditional number has been 12. This recommendation took it to 8. From my perspective, it was really, what was the rationale from the 12 to 8
I think it was-
reduction?
It was when
Who's
we
trying to get control of the ordinance?
put forward all of the zones and suggested caps, and everybody got upset, and it didn't work. It was in conjunction with the zones, though, that we were working with it, and it was not applicable, as I read, to those properties that were excluded.
Excluded from the zones.
Correct.
Well, the recommendation this happened after the zones kind of went away, but I think there was 8, and David knows I'm looking at him, because I think this came from David. There was 8 in the back part of the island, but we incorporated 8 for everywhere going forward.
Well, that's what this is doing.
That's what this is doing, and that's what generated.
Yes, I was gonna say, but just kind of my opinion is, I thought the 8 was right for the back part of the island, conceded that 12 on the front beach was okay, but if you're not going to make that distinction and treat them all the same, then all of them should be treated as 8, not 12.
You're going to have to explain that to the principal.
That was my rationale for supporting it.
No, I think that was I think the rest of it was either kind of accepted or dismissed. Marty, sorry.
Like accepted or dismissed?
But that one really, and I do think it was specifically the 12 to 8. It could be more than that, but I think the kind of closing the loop of what was in effect in 2010, I think that they were comfortable with that, but it was specifically lowering it from 12 to 8. So is everybody good for the 26th at 5? Does that
I'm
work?
not, but
You're not? Oh,
So no noise or.
so who's going to
business
explain David's,
He can do it via Zoom.
yeah, I'll try to work something out, but.
all right. Well, we can,
We can
I'm kidding.
reschedule.
You don't
I mean-
have to, but
I mean, that's really my feelings was, we were debating the 8 and 12. We compromised, said 8 on the back, 12 on the front. But if
But
we're
then
not
once
going,
that went
if
away-
we're not going to compromise, then I kind of feel the 8 was the better number.
all right.
I don't know how many people agreed with me, but
Well, a majority
Well,
of planning commission.
You convinced enough people.
All right. So
But I
we'll
think
we'll
also-
meet on the 25th at 5. Comprehensive plan, we're still working on. Suzanne, Matt, myself are,
Suzanne had a meltdown. Suzanne forgot her instructions.
we get, and that'll be
Say
forthcoming.
the memory's the first thing you got.
Sea level rise adaptation plan.
Thanks.
We, Seaman and Whiteside is under construction, under contract. They are asking for kind of initial information, so that's now underway. So they'll be starting in earnest, and I think they'll want to come talk to you all about your thoughts on future planning, things like, stormwater issues, protection issues. It gets complicated with oceanfront utilities, development, all low, susceptible to sea level rise.
What are they called, CIPs? On the other.
Capital improvement plans, yeah.
The 10 years out.
Yep.
10-year cap.
That's it for me.
It's all part of it.
Everybody good?
Motion to adjourn?
Motion to discuss?
Thank you all.
A second, but I'll take yours as a second.
Was that 3 hours?
It's pushing it. 2 hours, 20.